Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished her morning run through the hills of San Diego. At 26, she had already proven herself as one of the most dedicated physical trainers at the local fitness center. But something was missing. Her clients respected her. Her colleagues admired her work ethic. But she felt like she was running in circles, literally and figuratively. The daughter of a retired Marine drill sergeant, Sarah had grown up hearing stories of military excellence and brotherhood. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had served 3 tours overseas and came home with a chest full of medals and a head full of stories that captivated young Sarah. He never pushed military life on his daughter, but he did instill in her the values of discipline, perseverance, and never backing down from a challenge. Sarah had always been athletic. In high school, she dominated track and field, setting school records in cross-country running and long-distance events. College brought a full scholarship to UC San Diego, where she studied exercise science while continuing to break records on the track team. Her coaches often remarked that she had the heart of a warrior trapped in an athlete's body. After graduation, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The corporate fitness world felt too tame, too predictable. She craved something that would push her beyond her comfort zone, something that would test every fiber of her being. That's when she stumbled upon an article about Navy SEAL training standards during her lunch break at the gym. The article detailed the grueling physical requirements that had remained largely unchanged for decades. The PST, or physical screening test, was the gateway that separated hopefuls from the elite. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, a 1.5-mile run, and a 500-yard swim. The numbers looked intimidating on paper, but what caught Sarah's attention were the stories of candidates who had trained for years only to fall short by mere seconds or repetitions. That evening, Sarah found herself researching everything she could about Navy SEAL training. She learned about Hell Week, the notorious 6-day test of endurance that broke even the strongest candidates. She read about the dropout rates, the mental warfare, and the brotherhood that emerged from shared suffering. Most importantly, she discovered that while women were not yet allowed in SEAL teams, there were whispers of change coming to the special operations community. Her father noticed the shift in her demeanor over dinner that weekend. Sarah had always been focused, but now there was something different in her eyes. A hunger he recognized from his own military days. When she finally told him about her interest in military training standards, Miguel smiled knowingly. "You know, Mija, I've seen that look before," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "That's the look of someone who's found their calling. But be careful what you wish for. Military training isn't just about being physically tough, it's about breaking you down completely and seeing what's left when everything else is stripped away." Sarah spent the next week diving deeper into her research. She learned about the minimum standards: 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, 10 pull-ups with no time limit, a 1.5-mile run in under 10.5 minutes, and a 500-yard swim in under 12 minutes and 30 seconds. These were just the minimums to be considered for training. The real elite performers scored much higher. The more she researched, the more determined she became. Sarah had always thrived on challenges that others deemed impossible. In college, when her coach said no woman had ever broken the 19-minute barrier in the 5K at their school, Sarah trained relentlessly until she clocked an 18-minute, 45-second finish. When the gym's previous squat record seemed unbeatable, Sarah quietly worked until she surpassed it by 20 pounds. But this was different. This wasn't about beating college records or impressing gym members. This was about proving to herself that she could meet the standards of the most elite fighting force in the world, even if she would never officially be allowed to join their ranks. Sarah began modifying her training routine, focusing specifically on the PST events. She studied technique videos, analyzed the biomechanics of each movement, and created a systematic approach to improvement. Her typical clients started noticing changes in her programming as she tested new methods on herself first. The swimming component proved to be her biggest challenge. While Sarah was a competent swimmer, the specific technique required for the 500-yard breaststroke or side stroke used in SEAL testing was foreign to her. She enrolled in master's swimming classes, and hired a former collegiate swim coach to help her develop the endurance and technique needed for the test. 3 months into her new training regimen, Sarah had made significant progress. Her push-ups had improved from 35 to 48, her sit-ups from 42 to 53, and she had gone from struggling with 5 pull-ups to completing 8 solid repetitions. The running came naturally to her, and she was already well under the time standard. Swimming remained her weakness, but she was steadily improving. It was during this time that Sarah learned about an upcoming military fitness expo in San Diego. The event would feature demonstrations from various special operations units, including a group of active Navy SEALs, who would be showcasing their training methods and answering questions about military fitness standards. Sarah marked the date on her calendar with a red pen. She had been training in isolation, measuring her progress against online standards and YouTube videos. This would be her first opportunity to see real SEALs in action, and maybe get some insight into whether her training was on the right track. The weeks leading up to the expo became intensely focused for Sarah. She pushed herself harder than ever before, often arriving at the gym before dawn and staying late into the evening. Her father watched with a mixture of pride and concern as his daughter transformed before his eyes. The playful athlete was evolving into something more serious, more determined, and perhaps more dangerous to herself if she pushed too hard. 2 weeks before the expo, Sarah decided to conduct her first official PST attempt. She had been tracking her progress in individual events, but she had never tried to complete the entire test sequence with proper rest periods and official timing. The results would tell her whether months of dedicated training had brought her close to her goal, or if she still had mountains to climb. The morning of Sarah's first official PST attempt arrived with typical San Diego perfection: clear skies, 72 degrees, and a gentle breeze that seemed designed for athletic achievement. Sarah had spent the previous evening preparing like she was heading into actual SEAL selection. She laid out her gear, hydrated properly, and went to bed early after a light meal of lean protein and complex carbohydrates. She arrived at the university pool facility where she had arranged to conduct her test at 6 in the morning. The pool was empty, except for the lifeguard who had agreed to supervise and time her events. Sarah had enlisted her friend Mike, a former Army Ranger, to serve as her official timer and counter. Mike understood the significance of what Sarah was attempting and had volunteered to ensure everything was conducted according to proper military standards. The PST traditionally began with the swim. Sarah stood at the pool's edge in her regulation swimsuit, goggles, and cap. The 500-yard distance stretched before her like an ocean. In training, she had been consistently completing the distance in around 13 minutes, just 30 seconds over the required time. But those had been casual training swims. This was different. Mike gave her the countdown, and Sarah dove in with a clean entry. The first 100 yards felt smooth and controlled. Her stroke was steady, her breathing rhythmic, and her confidence high. By the 200-yard mark, she was ahead of her target pace. The pool's institutional chlorine smell filled her nostrils with each breath, but she had learned to find comfort in its familiarity. At 300 yards, fatigue began setting in earlier than expected. The pressure of official timing was affecting her more than she had anticipated. Her stroke began to feel labored, and she could feel her heart rate climbing beyond her optimal zone. Sarah forced herself to focus on technique over speed, remembering her coach's advice about efficiency being more important than power in distance swimming. The final 200 yards became a mental battle. Sarah's shoulders burned, and her legs felt like concrete weights dragging behind her. But she had experienced this feeling before in long training runs when her body wanted to quit but her mind refused to surrender. She found her second wind in the final 100 yards and touched the wall with a final desperate stroke. Mike's voice echoed across the empty pool facility. 12 minutes. 15 seconds. Sarah had beaten the standard by 15 seconds. As she pulled herself from the pool, water streaming from her body, she felt a surge of confidence that carried into the next phase of testing. After the mandatory 10-minute rest period, Sarah moved to the pool deck for push-ups. She had practiced this transition countless times, knowing that moving from the horizontal swimming position to vertical push-ups could be disorienting. Her muscles felt loose and warm, which was exactly what she wanted. Mike positioned himself with his clipboard and stopwatch. Push-ups, 2 minutes. Begin. Sarah dropped into position and began her familiar rhythm. She had developed a strategy of performing the first 40 repetitions at a steady, controlled pace, then pushing hard for the final 20 seconds to maximize her count. Her form was textbook perfect. Full extension at the top, chest touching the ground at the bottom. No sagging hips or partial repetitions. By the 90-second mark, she had completed 45 repetitions and was still feeling strong. The final 30 seconds became a sprint as Sarah pumped out 8 more perfect push-ups before Mike called time. 53 push-ups, Mike announced. Sarah was 3 repetitions above the minimum standard and feeling increasingly confident about her preparation. The hardest individual event was behind her, and she was ahead of schedule on 2 of the 5 components. The sit-up test followed another 10-minute rest period. Sarah lay on her back on the pool deck's warm concrete, feet anchored by Mike, ready to begin. Sit-ups had always been her strongest event, and she approached this portion with quiet confidence. The 2 minutes flew by in a blur of controlled repetitions. Sarah found her rhythm early and maintained it throughout, never feeling the burning fatigue that had plagued her during training sessions. Her core strength, developed through years of functional fitness training, served her well as she powered through repetition after repetition. When Mike called time, Sarah had completed 62 sit-ups, well above the minimum standard. She was now 3 for 3 on the events completed, and her confidence was building with each success. But she knew the real tests were still ahead. Pull-ups represented Sarah's biggest concern going into the test. While there was no time limit, the requirement for 10 clean repetitions with full extension and chin clearing the bar had proven challenging during training. Her grip strength was solid, but her body weight made each repetition significantly more difficult than it would be for a smaller candidate. Sarah approached the pull-up bar that Mike had set up on the pool facility's outdoor fitness area. She chalked her hands carefully, knowing that grip failure would end this event prematurely. Taking a deep breath, she gripped the bar with an overhand grip and hung for a moment to ensure her grip was solid. The first 5 pull-ups felt smooth and controlled. Sarah focused on pulling with her back muscles rather than relying solely on her arms, a technique that had served her well during training. By the 7th repetition, she could feel the familiar burn beginning in her lats and biceps. Repetition 8 required more mental focus than physical strength, but she powered through cleanly. Repetition 9 took everything Sarah had learned about mental toughness over the past 6 months. Her muscles screamed for relief, but she had come too far to quit 1 repetition short of the standard. She pulled with everything she had, clearing the bar with her chin and holding for a moment to ensure the repetition counted. The 10th and final pull-up became a test of pure willpower. Sarah's grip felt like it was failing, her arms shook with fatigue, but she refused to drop from the bar. With a final surge of effort that came from somewhere deeper than muscle memory, she pulled her chin over the bar and held it there until Mike confirmed the repetition. As Sarah dropped from the bar, she felt a mixture of relief and excitement. She had completed 10 pull-ups, exactly meeting the minimum standard. 4 events down, 1 to go, and she was beating or meeting standards in every category. The final event was the 1.5-mile run. After a 15-minute rest period to allow her heart rate to return to normal, Sarah found herself at the starting line of the university track. The distance that had once been her specialty now represented the final obstacle between her and a successful PST completion. Mike positioned himself at the finish line with his stopwatch. Sarah had been consistently running the distance in under 9 minutes during training, well ahead of the 10-minute, 30-second standard, but she had never attempted it after completing 4 other demanding physical events. As Mike gave her the start signal, Sarah settled into the pace she had practiced hundreds of times over the previous months. The track felt familiar under her feet, and despite the fatigue from the previous events, her running legs felt surprisingly fresh. The 6 laps around the university track blurred together as Sarah found her rhythm. Her breathing was controlled, her stride efficient, and despite the accumulated fatigue from the previous 4 events, she felt strong. The morning sun was beginning to climb higher, casting long shadows across the track as she powered through lap after lap. By the 4th lap, Sarah knew she was well ahead of pace. Her internal clock, finely tuned through years of competitive running, told her she was well ahead of pace. Her heart rate was rising, her breathing was controlled, and her stride was efficient. The morning sun was beginning to climb higher, casting long shadows across the track as she powered through lap after lap. By the 4th lap, Sarah knew she was well ahead of pace. Her internal clock, finely tuned through years of competitive running, told her she was on track for a sub-9-minute finish. The realization brought a surge of adrenaline that carried her through the final 2 laps with increasing speed. As Sarah crossed the finish line, Mike's voice carried across the empty track. 8 minutes, 47 seconds. She had beaten the standard by over 1 minute and 40 seconds. More importantly, she had successfully completed her first official PST, meeting or exceeding every standard. Standing on the track, hands on her hips as she caught her breath, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. 6 months of dedicated training had culminated in this moment. She had proven to herself that the physical standards of Navy SEAL selection were within her reach. But even as she celebrated this milestone, she knew it was just the beginning. The Military Fitness Expo was now just 1 week away, and Sarah's successful PST had given her the confidence to attend with a specific goal in mind. She wanted to meet real Navy SEALs, not as a curious civilian, but as someone who had earned the right to ask serious questions about training and standards. Sarah spent the week fine-tuning her performance and researching the SEALs who would be presenting at the expo. She learned that the demonstration team included several instructors from the Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training program, known as BUD-S. These were the men responsible for evaluating and training future SEALs, the guardians of the standards she had just met. The day of the expo arrived with typical military precision. Sarah arrived early, dressed in athletic gear that clearly marked her as someone serious about fitness rather than a casual attendee. The venue was buzzing with activity as various military units set up their displays and demonstration areas. The Navy SEAL booth was positioned in the center of the expo, surrounded by pull-up bars, a swimming demonstration tank, and timing equipment. A small crowd had already gathered around 5 men in Navy PT gear who were preparing for their demonstration. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe and listen without being intrusive. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson was leading the demonstration. A 12-year SEAL veteran with multiple overseas deployments, Thompson had the weathered look of someone who had been tested by more than just physical training. His voice carried the authority that came from years of leading men through impossible situations. "The PST is just the beginning," Thompson was explaining to the gathered crowd. "We use these standards to identify people who have the basic physical tools needed for SEAL training. But passing the PST doesn't guarantee you'll make it through BUD-S. We've seen guys who barely met minimums go on to graduate, and we've seen others who crushed every standard ring the bell during Hell Week." Sarah listened intently as Thompson continued his explanation of the training pipeline. He spoke about the mental aspects of SEAL training, the importance of teamwork, and the reality that physical fitness was just one component of what made a successful special operator. During a break in the formal presentation, Sarah approached the group with a specific question. She had decided to be direct about her interest, rather than trying to hide her intentions. "Chief Thompson," she said, getting his attention, "I'm curious about something specific. I've been training to PST standards for the past 6 months, and I successfully completed my first official test last week. I'm wondering what kind of scores would be considered competitive for someone serious about this path." Thompson looked at Sarah with interest. It wasn't unusual for civilians to ask about SEAL training, but her question suggested a level of serious preparation that caught his attention. "What were your numbers?" he asked. Sarah recited her PST results. 12 minutes 15 seconds for the swim, 53 push-ups, 62 sit-ups, 10 pull-ups, and 8 minutes 47 seconds for the run. She delivered the numbers matter-of-factly, without boasting or false modesty. The other SEALs in the group had stopped their conversations and were now listening. Petty Officer First Class Jason Rivera, who served as a PST evaluator at the Naval Special Warfare Center, raised his eyebrows. "Those are solid numbers," he said. "You're well above minimums in every event. The swim time is particularly good for someone without a swimming background." Thompson nodded in agreement. Competitive scores for men typically run around 11 minutes for the swim, 70 to 80 push-ups, 70 to 80 sit-ups, 15 to 20 pull-ups, and under 9 minutes for the run. Your numbers would put you in the middle of most PST groups, which is impressive. Sarah felt a surge of pride at the validation from actual SEAL instructors, but she also realized how much room for improvement remained. "What would you say are the most common weaknesses you see in PST candidates?" she asked. Pull-ups and swimming, Rivera answered immediately. A lot of people can run and do push-ups and sit-ups, but pull-ups require specific strength that you can't fake. And swimming is technical. You can be in great shape and still struggle in the water if your technique isn't efficient. Thompson added. Mental preparation is huge too. The PST is stressful. We see people who crush these numbers in training but fall apart when they're being officially evaluated. The psychological pressure is something you can't really simulate until you're actually being tested. Sarah found herself in an extended conversation with the SEAL instructors about training methods, common mistakes, and the realities of the selection process. What impressed her most was their professionalism and genuine interest in helping serious candidates prepare properly. As the conversation continued, Thompson made an observation that would change the trajectory of Sarah's journey. You know, he said, we don't get many people who've put this level of serious preparation into meeting our standards just for personal achievement. Most people who train this hard are either planning to enlist or they're already in the military trying to cross-rate into NSW. Sarah explained her background and motivation, her desire to test herself against the highest physical standards she could find. She mentioned her father's military service and her own competitive athletic background. She was honest about the fact that she knew women weren't currently allowed in SEAL teams, but that the physical challenge itself was what drove her. Well, Thompson said after listening to her explanation, there's talk that things might be changing in the special operations community regarding women in combat roles. It's not official yet, and it might be years before anything happens, but the conversation is definitely happening at levels way above my pay grade. Rivera jumped in with a suggestion that would prove to be a turning point. We're doing a special demonstration next month at the Naval Special Warfare Center. It's not a public event, but we invite serious candidates and fitness professionals to observe actual BUDS training methods. You might find it interesting, and it would give you a chance to see what comes after the PST. Thompson nodded in agreement. We could probably get you an invitation if you're serious about continuing this journey. It's not an official evaluation or anything, but you'd get to see real SEAL training up close. Fair warning though, it might either inspire you to push harder or convince you that you're crazy for trying this in the first place. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'd be honored to attend, she said. Whatever I can learn about improving my preparation or understanding the process better would be valuable. As the expo wound down, Sarah exchanged contact information with several of the SEALs and received detailed feedback about her training plan. They suggested modifications to her swimming technique, recommended specific exercises for improving pull-up performance, and shared insights about mental preparation that she had never considered. Driving home that evening, Sarah felt like she had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer just someone training to military standards as a personal challenge. She had been recognized by actual SEAL instructors as someone worth taking seriously, someone whose preparation and dedication merited their professional attention. The invitation to observe BUD/S training represented an opportunity she had never imagined possible. In 1 month, she would get to see the legendary SEAL training program firsthand, to understand what lay beyond the PST that had consumed her focus for the past 6 months. The month between the expo and the Naval Special Warfare Center visit passed in a blur of intensified training. Sarah had taken the SEAL's feedback seriously and completely restructured her preparation routine. Her swimming coach introduced new drills focused on efficiency rather than speed. Her pull-up training shifted from high-volume sessions to focused strength work with weighted repetitions and negative training. Most importantly, Sarah began incorporating mental preparation techniques into her routine. She researched meditation practices used by special operations forces, studied sports psychology, and began practicing visualization exercises. The physical preparation had been challenging, but she was beginning to understand that mental toughness would be equally important. 3 days before her visit to the Naval Special Warfare Center, Sarah conducted another official PST to measure her progress. The improvement was dramatic. Her swim time dropped to 11 minutes flat. Her push-ups increased to 61, sit-ups to 67, pull-ups to 13, and her run time improved to 8 minutes and 32 seconds. These numbers put her well into what the SEALs had described as competitive territory. The Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado presented an imposing sight as Sarah approached the main gate. The facility sprawled across hundreds of acres, with training areas visible in the distance and the Pacific Ocean providing a dramatic backdrop. Security was tight, and Sarah had to present multiple forms of identification along with her official invitation letter before being allowed entry. Chief Thompson met her at the Visitors Center, now wearing full military utility uniform rather than the casual PT gear from the expo. His demeanor was more formal in this official setting, but he still carried the same professional warmth that had impressed Sarah during their initial meeting. "Welcome to the teams," Thompson said as he signed Sarah in and provided her with a visitor badge. "Today you're going to see what we put our candidates through during the early phases of BUD/S training. Fair warning. Some of what you see might look like organized torture. That's by design." The first stop was the infamous grinder, a large asphalt courtyard where much of the physical training took place. A class of BUD/S candidates was in the middle of a conditioning session, performing an exercise sequence that made Sarah's PST training look like a warm-up routine. "First phase is all about building basic fitness and water confidence," Thompson explained as they watched the candidates struggle through seemingly endless repetitions of push-ups, sit-ups, and flutter kicks. "We start with the PST standards you've been training to, but by the end of first phase, these guys need to be performing at much higher levels." Sarah watched in fascination as the instructor cadre pushed the candidates through exercise after exercise with minimal rest between events. What struck her most was not the physical difficulty, though that was obvious, but the mental pressure being applied. Instructors were constantly challenging the candidates, questioning their motivation, and looking for any sign of mental weakness. "The physical training is important," Thompson continued, "but what we're really evaluating is how people respond to stress, uncertainty, and discomfort. Anyone can do push-ups when they're fresh and motivated. We need to know what happens when you're exhausted, confused, and being yelled at by 3 instructors at once." The next part of the tour took them to the pool complex, where candidates were practicing water confidence exercises. Sarah had become comfortable with swimming during her training, but what she observed here was completely different. Candidates were expected to perform complex underwater tasks, while instructors actively tried to disorient and stress them. "Water is our environment," explained Petty Officer Rivera, who had joined the tour. "Every SEAL needs to be as comfortable in the water as on land. But it's not just about swimming fast or far. You need to be able to think clearly and perform complex tasks underwater, often in challenging conditions." Sarah watched as candidates attempted to swim laps while instructors created artificial currents with long poles, forcing the swimmers to constantly adjust their technique and navigate obstacles. Others were practicing equipment recovery exercises, diving to the bottom of the deep end to retrieve objects while holding their breath. The most challenging exercise Sarah observed was called drown-proofing. Candidates had their hands tied behind their backs and feet bound together, then were expected to survive in deep water for extended periods, using only body positioning and breathing techniques. The exercise looked terrifying, but every candidate was expected to master it before moving forward in training. "This is where we lose a lot of people," Thompson admitted. "Not because they can't swim, but because they panic when things get uncomfortable. The water doesn't care about your PST scores. If you can't stay calm when you're struggling, you're going to have problems." As the tour continued, Sarah began to understand the massive gap between passing the PST and actually completing SEAL training. The physical standards she had worked so hard to achieve were just the entry requirement. The real training was designed to test every aspect of human performance under extreme stress. The highlight of the visit came when Thompson offered Sarah an opportunity to experience a modified version of one of the training evolutions. "We can't put you through the full exercise for liability reasons," he explained, "but we can give you a taste of what the candidates experience. Are you interested in trying a shortened version of our pool confidence exercise?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," she replied, despite feeling a flutter of nervousness about what she was agreeing to attempt. The exercise involved swimming 2 lengths of the 50-meter pool underwater, without surfacing for air, while instructors created disturbances on the surface to simulate combat conditions. Sarah had never attempted anything like this during her training, but she was determined to give it her best effort. Standing at the pool's edge in borrowed swim gear, Sarah felt the weight of observation from the SEAL instructors who had gathered to watch. This was no longer theoretical training or personal challenge. She was about to attempt an actual BUD/S training exercise under the evaluation of men who had completed the most difficult military training in the world. Thompson provided brief instructions on technique and safety procedures, but the guidance was minimal. "The key is staying calm and managing your air efficiently," he said. "Don't try to swim fast. Smooth and steady will get you farther than thrashing around." Sarah took several deep breaths to prepare, hyperventilating slightly to increase her blood oxygen levels. On Thompson's signal, she dove cleanly into the pool and began swimming underwater, using a modified breaststroke that would maximize her distance per breath. The first length felt manageable. Sarah focused on technique and tried to ignore the burning sensation beginning in her lungs. The instructors were using pool equipment to create surface disturbances, but the underwater environment remained relatively calm. As she made the turn at the far end of the pool, Sarah could feel the serious oxygen debt beginning to build. Her body was demanding that she surface, but she forced herself to continue swimming toward the finish point. The second length seemed twice as long as the first, and by the halfway point, she was fighting every instinct that told her to surface immediately. The final 25 meters became a pure test of mental will. Sarah's lungs burned. Her vision began to narrow, and every fiber of her being screamed for oxygen. But she had come too far to quit now. She focused on the black line at the bottom of the pool and continued moving forward with increasingly desperate strokes. When Sarah finally touched the wall at the finish point and surfaced, she gasped for air like someone who had been drowning. The pool deck erupted in appreciative whistles and applause from the SEAL instructors, who had been watching her struggle through the exercise. "Not bad for a first-timer," Rivera called out, as Sarah hung on the pool wall, still catching her breath. "Most people surface halfway through when they realize how much air they actually need." Thompson helped Sarah out of the pool and handed her a towel. "That was impressive," he said seriously. "You've got the mental toughness to push through discomfort, which is something we can't teach. Either you have it, or you don't." As Sarah dried off and changed back into her clothes, she reflected on what she had just experienced. The underwater exercise had been more difficult than anything in her previous training, but she had completed it successfully. More importantly, she had proven to herself and the SEAL instructors that she possessed the mental resilience to push through serious physical and psychological challenges. The drive home from Coronado left Sarah with mixed emotions. She felt proud of completing the underwater exercise and earning respect from the SEAL instructors, but she also had a new understanding of how much more preparation would be required if she wanted to continue down this path. The gap between PST standards and actual SEAL training was massive, and she had only experienced a tiny fraction of what candidates endured. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself at another crossroads. Her personal challenge to meet PST standards had been achieved, but the exposure to real SEAL training had opened up possibilities she had never considered. Thompson had mentioned ongoing discussions about women in special operations roles, and while nothing was official, the possibility intrigued her more than she cared to admit. Sarah's training routine evolved again as she incorporated lessons learned from her visit to the Naval Special Warfare Center. She added water confidence exercises to her swimming sessions, practiced breath-holding techniques, and began training in conditions designed to simulate stress and discomfort. Her father noticed the changes in her approach and intensity. "You're training differently now," Miguel observed one evening as Sarah returned from a particularly grueling session. "This isn't just about fitness anymore, is it?" Sarah sat down across from her father, still catching her breath from a 2-hour workout that had included swimming, running, and strength training with minimal rest between events. "I don't know, Dad," she said honestly. 6 months ago, this was just about proving something to myself. But after seeing what those guys do, what they're capable of, I can't shake the feeling that maybe I could actually do this for real." Miguel studied his daughter carefully. He had seen her tackle challenges before, but there was something different in her eyes now. The casual determination of an athlete had been replaced by the focused intensity of someone who had found a mission. It was a look he recognized from his own military service. You know the odds, right? Miguel said gently. Even if they do change the policies, even if women are allowed to attempt SEAL training, the failure rate is still going to be enormous. These aren't just physical challenges. They're designed to break people psychologically. Sarah nodded. I know the statistics. But Chief Thompson said something that stuck with me. He said they can teach technique and tactics, but they can't teach mental toughness. You either have it or you don't, and I think I might have it. The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone ringing. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was San Diego. She answered cautiously, not sure who would be calling her on a weeknight. Is this Sarah Martinez? The voice was professional and familiar, though she couldn't immediately place it. Yes, this is Sarah. Who am I speaking with? This is Chief Thompson from Naval Special Warfare. We met at the expo, and you visited our training center last month. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Sarah's heart rate immediately increased. She had not expected to hear from the SEALs again, unless she reached out to them. Of course, Chief. What can I do for you? I've got some interesting news that I thought you might want to hear. The Navy just announced that they're going to begin allowing women to attempt SEAL training on an experimental basis. It's still very early in the process, and there are a lot of bureaucratic hurdles to work through, but the policy change is official. Sarah felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She had hoped this might happen eventually, but she had expected it to take years of political and military debate. When would this start? She managed to ask. That's the complicated part, Thompson continued. They're looking for a small group of women to serve as test cases. The candidates would need to meet all current physical and psychological standards, plus additional requirements that haven't been finalized yet. They want people who are already prepared, not people who are going to need months of additional training just to reach baseline standards. Sarah's mind was racing. Are you telling me this because you think I might be a candidate for this program? I'm telling you this because the fitness performance and mental toughness you demonstrated during your visit impressed a lot.